Oop, yes, okay. All right. So when we left off, we were sort of, we've introduced the idea of AutoCAD, right? So you're all pretty familiar now with the interface and all the, where the tools are, not all the tools, but where the tools are, how to navigate about AutoCAD, and hopefully generally just how things work. What I'd like to do today, and let's see, is we are going to learn how to draw a little bit, right? We have a lot of drawing tools in AutoCAD, and we're going to learn how to use some of them today. So lines, you're pretty familiar with lines probably at this point, but we'll go over how you actually draw something with a line, right? Other than just, you know how to use coordinates, you know how direct entry, you know kind of the textbook way of going about it. But how do I get into AutoCAD and draw a door, right? So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about circles and arcs, and I think we're going to do just rectangles today actually, okay? And then you will have you'll have a drawing assignment. And then since we are starting with some basic drawing commands, kind of a good thing to partner that with is some modification commands. So not only, good morning. So not only are we going to learn how to draw a few basic things, we're going to learn how to modify them a little bit. So how do we move things, right? How do we copy things? How do we offset things? Just a few different type of modification commands, okay? So we'll learn a few drawing commands, and then also some modification commands to modify those objects, okay? And then on Thursday, we're going to learn some drawing organization. And I guess some other things associated with that, but we're going to learn how to create layers, okay? All right, so we've got a lot to get through today, so I'll just get going. And I'm going to open up, let's see, what file do I want to open up? I want to open up Arc, Circle, Ellipse tutorial. It's under CAD Common, of course, and it's this third one down. I'm going to double click and open that up. Okay, so there are a few things in here, obviously. Let me just make sure I don't want to open anything else up. I think that's probably good. Yes, okay, that's good for now. One thing I want to tell you guys, Mandy did this the other day. This CAD Common file is public. Right? So you could, if you wanted to, open up your zip drive, you know, plug in your thumb drive to the computer, and you could copy the whole thing if you'd like. So you could have it at home. Not a bad idea, right? Okay. All right, well, let's talk about, I'm gonna go over a couple of drawing commands first, and then we'll talk about how we use all of them in combination to create things, okay? And I think, of course, we'll just review the line command first, just so you remember from this morning. And then we'll go over circles and arcs, and then I'll talk about how to use all of them in combination to create geometry, okay? Because our ultimate goal, of course, is to start drawing drawings like we see on the screen here. Little floor plans and you're going to do some of these little puzzle things to kind of sharpen your skills. How do we draw things like walls and doors, right? So let's talk about that. Of course, just a little note, and this kind of is key and applies to all commands in AutoCAD, but there's usually several different ways you can initiate a command in AutoCAD, right? And I've said before, you're going to initiate a command, you're going to add some definition or input, and then you're going to execute and end the command. So those are kind of the three things that you'll do with any AutoCAD command, okay? So for the line command, for example, I could click on line right here to initiate. I could come down to the command line, click and type line, enter, okay? I could also come up to the draw file menu, draw, and go to line. Now, if your file menu is missing, use this little drop down and it will say show menu bar right here, okay? If you have dynamic input turned on, okay, you're going to see something more a little bit like this, all right? I don't prefer dynamic input, so I always turn it off. If you don't happen to, sorry, let me move this out of the way here. Oh, sorry guys. There we go. That's better. If you don't happen to see the dynamic input icon down here, then you want to click on this little, these three little lines over here to customize, this customizes this toolbar down here, which will allow you to show or not show icons. So this one is the dynamic input, of course. So if I wanted it turned on, I would click on it, and then I could come down here and turn it on or off. Okay. We learned last week how to input different, or lines, I guess, realistically, lines, and create different types of shapes using coordinate entry last week, right? So absolute coordinates, polar coordinates, absolute coordinates, relative coordinates. I was like, what is the other one? Relative coordinates, right? And realistically, you will likely use the relative input every now and again, but by far and away, you're going to be using kind of just the direct entry method to create most of your geometry, okay? It's just the way it works. So when you're working in AutoCAD, you'll come up here, you'll initiate your command, click, line, click in model space, move in the direction you want to go. You'll type a dimension, 10 foot, enter, and continue on. Okay, that's going to be the most typical way of starting a drawing or project. Okay, now here at school, you will likely be given kind of a starting point for your drawings, right? In a lot of the assignments, and I think, of course, Jeff wrote this book, but it's in an effort to get you thinking about where you're drawing in model space and coordinates and keeping those things in mind, right? So you can know and understand how AutoCAD works. But for the most part, when you're working professionally, you know, you're likely not going to be saying, hey, I'm starting my drawing at 0.00 or 11 or 46 or whatever, right? You're just going to pop into model space and just start drawing, okay? Now, you're going to draw things to real world scale, right? I'm kind of reminding you of a few things. So if your building is 200 feet by 100 foot, your building gets drawn 200 feet by 100 foot in AutoCAD, okay? I'm going to delete this line. I want to remind you that, right, we initiate the command, we click to specify our first point. You can come down here and turn your drawing aids to help you draw. So you'll notice I don't really have a straight line going right here. I'm going to come down and turn ortho on, click, and immediately I can only draw straight lines, all right? When I grade your assignments, I look for straight lines, right? AutoCAD, that's one of its strengths, is lines that have a specific dimension that are straight, unless they're specifically not supposed to be straight, right? So something like maybe this little diagonal on that floor plan, but you want your lines otherwise to be straight, okay? So I'll be looking for those things on your assignment. So don't eyeball anything in AutoCAD. You'll get yourself in big trouble when you're working in an office, okay? So I say that because, you know, I can look at this line and I can say, oh, I want to draw a straight line. And I can look at it and say, well, that looks pretty straight to me, right? Click. But, and it does, this one actually does look pretty straight. But if I turn my ortho on, you see how really it's not straight, right? So eyeballing things in AutoCAD just doesn't work, so just don't do it, all right? I'm going to delete those two lines. Okay, so lines, again, we initiate the command, we come down into model space, we click, move in the direction we go, initiate any type of drawing aids that we want to use, like ortho, reminding you too, ortho is a quick key F8, F8, off, F8, on, off, on, okay? I move in the direction I want to go, I type a dimension, 10 foot, enter, and I just continue on, right? This is a command that continues on, so I could type 1 foot, enter. I can move this direction and type 12 foot, enter. Or click, 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 and there we go, okay? So when I want to draw something, for example, like this door here, there's a door here, obviously it's missing its swing, right? But it has some walls here and it has this door panel right here. So when I want to draw something dimensional, and let me just add a couple of more dimensions. Look how easy that is, right? To add dimensions. Okay, we'll add one here just for the sake of making it easy. Okay, So when I want to draw something like this wall segment, I can initiate my line command, click, and I'll just draw it below. Okay. If I want to line something up, do you remember we have object tracking? All right. Object tracking allows me to kind of touch something, and oh, it's not turned on. I don't have it turned on. Oh, I don't even think I have my little icon there. Let's find it. Let's see, where's my tracking? Coordinates, day, line weight, selection. Object snap tracking. Oh, there it, no, it is there. There it is. Okay. I'm going to turn it on and off just to maybe let it remind itself that it's supposed to be turned on. There we go. So I turned it on and off. It's this little guy right here. Okay. And I touch something, I move in a direction I want to maybe initiate a command, and you see it drags a little line down. And that's pretty helpful because, you know, for example, if I'm trying to maybe find the midpoint of something, I can, instead of drawing a bunch of extra geometry to help me draw it, I can maybe hover from the midpoint of that door, come over here, you see they snap and they line up and I can start drawing, right? So it's just kind of a visual drawing tool. What I'm going to do is come down here to draw, for example, this wall. I'm going to come down here, click, initiate my command. I know that it's 4 feet in this direction, so I'm going to type 4 foot, enter. I know that it's 4 inches in this direction, so I move my mouse down, I type 4, enter. And you notice how my mouse is kind of off to the right side of that line I was drawing, right? Even though, you know, so I want to draw a straight line, but my mouse is kind of over here, and you're thinking, well, if my mouse is kind of over here, does that make my line not straight, right? Well, if I have ortho on, it does. It continues to be straight. If I didn't have ortho on, here's ortho, click, then when I drew it wouldn't be, but ortho constrains it. So even though I'm down over here to the right when I enter that dimension, it still is drawn straight. Okay, I'm going to move in the direction I want to go, another 4 foot, enter, and then I could just come up here, use my hopefully endpoint snap, click and escape, and I've drawn that portion of it. Okay, let me do that one more time. Line, I hover, I move down, click, move in the direction I want to go. I could type 4 feet. I could also kind of line this up using that object above it because I know that that's 4 feet long, right? So in AutoCAD you can use other pieces of geometry to kind of define what you're currently doing, right? So I hover, I don't touch it, click, move down, 4 for 4 inches, enter, and the command continues. I move in the direction I want to go, hover, drag that down. You see how it lines up, click, click, escape, and I'm done. Okay, so you guys will you'll pretty quickly get a good sense for how all of these things work together. All right. Okay, so we know how to draw, you know, a few pieces of these. We don't know how to draw the arc yet, right? We'll talk about that. But we do know how to create some of these objects. Now, another tool that would have been pretty helpful to know, and we can talk about that now, is the rectangle tool, right? Because this is realistically a rectangle. So I could draw this object using 4 lines, or I could use the rectangle tool. Either tool is completely valid. It doesn't really matter which one you draw. Whichever one you're more comfortable with and works for you is adequate. Okay. So the rectangle tool, rectangle's, you know, considered a polygon, is right here. It's right next to arc. If I click on rectangle, of course it initiates the command. All right, and I can drag down, click, and you see immediately a rectangle is created. I click again, and I can just create a free form rectangle with no dimension. Okay. All right, let me do that one more time. So I click on rectangle, click, move in the direction I want to go, click again, and I've created a free form rectangle with no dimension. All right. Now, what if I want to create a rectangle with dimension, number 1, and number 2, what if I want to measure and just double check that once it's created, it's the right size, right? I can look at this wall and I can say, well, I'm pretty sure I drew it at 4 feet, but how do you check that, right? Which is something you'll do continuously in AutoCAD, just making sure you got it right. Okay, so let me show you first how to create a dimensional rectangle, a couple different ways, and then we'll talk about how we measure those things, okay? So I can come up here, I can initiate the rectangle command using the icon. I can come over here to draw, and we have rectangle. And then I could also, of course, come down here to my command line and rec rectangle. Okay, I have it here, I can click on it, I can type rec, I could type that out rectangle and hit enter. All right, and it's going to ask me to, of course, specify my first point. Click. Okay, now I could just click and create a freeform rectangle, but what I want to do is create a dimensional one. So I'm going to come down here. Things you're going to start noticing about the command line is we not only have instructions on what needs to happen next, but we also have some options here available to us. So we have area, dimension, and rotation. Okay. If I click on dimension, or if I type the blue letter D and hit enter, it'll say, hey, specify a length for the rectangle. So by choosing D, it's asking me, it's going to say, I'm defining in AutoCAD dimension, right? Add dimensions to your rectangle. Okay, let's type 36 inches, enter. Specify a width, 36 inches, enter. And it creates a rectangle. Okay. Now, the final step here is, I just typed in dimensions, 3 feet, 3 feet. Now AutoCAD is saying, hey, do you want it to be in the positive quadrant or the negative quadrant, right? So final step here, click and place the rectangle. Okay. Another way that I can create a dimensional rectangle is using relative input, right? So I can come up here to my rectangle, click, click to initiate my first point, and I can type since I've specified my first point using a click, that's already defined. Now to create my second point, I can either come down here to dimension, I could click, or a third option would be to specify an XY distance from that first point, a relative input, right? So I could type at 6,6, enter. And that second point of that top right corner of that rectangle is over 6 inches and up 6 inches from the beginning point. All right, so that is one operation right there that I use all the time. So when I'm drawing rectangles, and I'll really just mostly rectangles, but I use the at all the time to get a specific size, because this is something that you do maybe when you're drawing furniture, right? You're representing a table, or you're outlining a parking stall, or you're outlining a dash line for a desk, or I didn't mean to say desk. What was I? Now I've lost my train of thought of what I was thinking. But something, right? I'm trying to represent something in a specific spot in a drawing with the rectangle. And so the at input, the relative input, really is helpful, because I can specify that first point and then say, well, I know it has to be 20 feet by 20 feet, right? So that's pretty helpful. So I click on rectangle. First thing I could do is just kind of do freeform, right? Morning, click, click, okay. Second thing I can do is initiate it. I can click, and to specify the dimensions, I can come down here to dimensions, click, and I could type something like 24, 24, enter. Oh, what did I forget? I forgot the at symbol, and look what happened, right? I'm glad that happened, because instead of measuring relative to my first input, right, that first click, it measured off of the origin, and so it did this really goofy thing that, nothing happened. So I'm glad I forgot the at symbol. Click, at, 12, 12, enter. There is a rectangle that is 12 inches from here to here, right? 12 inches over, 12 inches up. Okay, so freeform input, we've got the at 12, 12, and then the final input to create a rectangle. We are going to come down, I'm going to click my first point, and I'm going to click on dimension, and we could type 16, comma 16, enter. Oh, no, sorry. I got confused in my inputs there. Sorry, let me start that over. Rectangle, click, dimension. I'm going to type my first dimension, so something like 36, enter. The next dimension, 48, enter, and there's my 36 by 48 rectangle. And of course, I just have to input where I want it, click input where I want it to rest in the quadrant. So click, and there's my rectangle. Okay. So let me just delete a few of these and show you how that would be useful in an actual drawing. I'm going to move these down a little, and we'll talk about move today. Right, I've drawn this piece of my wall, but now I need to draw this panel, okay? And let's measure it first. I'll show you how to measure. But essentially what I need to do is I need to initiate it, and I need to start it right here. And then this second point needs to be up and over, up 3 feet and over probably 2 inches, okay? So this is just a long and narrow rectangle, okay? I also need to somehow create this rectangle over here, and that needs to be 3 feet from this rectangle, so we'll talk about that, okay? But let's talk about how we measure things before I draw this rectangle. Up here on the Home tab, all the way at the very end, we have a measure tool. This will allow you to measure objects in AutoCAD. So if I click on measure, I get a cursor with a question mark next to it. If I look down at the command line, it says specify first point. So click once, specify second point down at the command line, click a second time, and down here at the command line you notice it gives me an X direction of 4 feet. Okay, so I just measured that, and it did confirm that when I drew it, it was actually 4 feet long. Escape, escape. Click on measure, click, click. I come down here, that's a Y direction, but it's 4 inches. Okay, so I can start measuring things. So I click on measure, click, click, and I confirmed it's 4 feet long right there. Okay, it's as simple as that. The command at the command line, if you want to type it in, is distance, and the shortcut is DI. Okay, so DI, enter, click, click, and you can measure things. You're going to be constantly measuring things. You want to make sure that your dimensions are correct for the objects that you've drawn, right? Because essentially, I mean, eventually, these things that you draw in AutoCAD are going to be built or manufactured, right? If you're doing shop drawings for millwork, right? Somebody's going to build that millwork off of these drawings that you create, and you want them to be accurate so that when they go to build it, it's not the wrong size. So we can draw lines, we can draw rectangles, we can measure things, right? Any questions about any of that so far? Not too bad, right? How do we now go about, creating something like this where, I've been able to create this first object, but now I need to create a gap right here, and I need to create a second 4-foot object over here and a door panel right there, okay? I'm going to teach you another drawing aid command. It's the from command, all right? And then I'll show you a geometric way to create this gap, and then we'll draw this door panel, all right? The from command will allow you to create a piece of geometry a specific distance from a first object, okay? It will allow you to create a piece of geometry from a specific distance, a specific distance from another object, right? So if I want to create a line that is 3 feet from this line, I would use the from command, okay? And what that will do is leave a gap and then allow me to draw, okay? This is one of those commands I have to do in sequence, or I lose myself in it. Okay, so the from command is going to be, it's going to be a right click input, but I'm going to initiate whatever command I want to, draw. Okay, so line, click. Now it says specify the first point, but my first point I want 3 feet from this object. Okay, so my first point is going to be shift right click from this point, click over 36 inches, enter, and it creates a line. Okay, I'm going to delete that one out. Now if I use my measure command right here, click, click, click. That is indeed 3 feet. Okay, so what's nice about that? I can leave gaps for doors, right? Or gaps for windows, or whatever else needs a space to be drawn in. Let me do that again. Line, okay, first point. Shift right click from this point, click over 36 inches, enter, and I can draw. It was sort of a fluke that a line got drawn in the other one. Okay. So this is pretty helpful when I want to draw a piece of furniture, you know, above a wall. And I think, well, I want to draw that piece of furniture 2 feet from the wall, right? I line, okay, the first point is shift right click from here, click up 24 inches, enter, and I can start drawing. Measure, click, click, and that's, oh, wait, let's see. Ooh, it's a tiny bit off. 1 foot 11 and 27/32. Let's do that again. Almost 2 feet. Line. Okay, shift right click from this point. Click up 24 inches, enter. And let's measure that. There we go, 2 feet. I think what happened on that first one is maybe I skewed my cursor and it took that little increment of an inch off. Now, it's kind of a tricky command, right? You have to do it in the right sequence, and if you don't, it doesn't work, and you know, it can be a little bit tricky, but it's pretty useful. Another way of going about maybe making a gap like this is to draw a piece of geometry there, and then once you're done with it, delete it. Okay, so I could use the from command to leave a gap and then draw the door panel, or I could also come up here to line, click, and I could draw a line here and say 3 foot, enter, and then I could start drawing my door panel here, line, right? So I'm drawing my door panel, 36 inches, 2 inches, enter, I come back down, I hover, I get my object tracking to work, engage, click, click, right? But now I have this extra line, I just delete it out. Geometry is free in AutoCAD, right? Feel free to use as much as you want and delete it when you're finished with it. That is one thing that you'll find about AutoCAD is that when you are creating things, you a lot of times will draw extra pieces of geometry to create things and then you'll delete them, right? So don't feel afraid to do that. Just the one thing you'll want to pay attention to is just making sure that once you've created it, to delete it so that you don't have excess geometry out there, okay? Okay, so I can draw a line across here. Either way is valid, from or using a piece of geometry there, completely valid. You can, you know, create those however you want. I created my door swing, my door panel, right? Sorry, using the line tool. But I could also use the rectangle tool if I wanted to draw that, right? So either one completely valid. Now it's time to draw this other last little piece of line segment here. Okay, so I've got my door panel created. Let me come up here to line, click, move in the direction I want to go, 4 foot, enter. Move down, 4, enter. Move back in the direction I want to go, 4 foot, enter. Close it off using a snap, click, escape. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So on example 1, the door is not connected or it doesn't look like it's connected. Is that just because of the color of the line?
Do you mean like right here? Or there's
So
no...
the door and the wall, it doesn't look like it's connected, but I guess it does. It's just the color sequence.
Probably just the colors. Yeah, I would. These are connected. Yeah, or they're not connected. They're touching right at that endpoint. Yeah. And these colors, if you're wondering what that is, that's layers, right? That's layering, visual and graphical organization in AutoCAD. And we'll talk about that later in the week, but they should be touching. That is a good point, though. You want to make sure that things are always touching, right? So use your object snaps to make sure that we're snapping to that endpoint, right, when we actually start drawing, okay? All right, so we've talked about lines. We know how to create rectangles now. We've talked about the from command. Okay, practice the from command. It's pretty helpful. Takes a little bit of getting used to, but it is very helpful. Let's talk about circles. Okay, any questions on any of this so far? No? The from. Should we do the from again?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to move this down a little bit, and we are just going to talk about the from command. So the from command will allow me to draw geometry a specific distance from a first piece of geometry, right? So when I'm using it, I'm creating a gap of some sort. Okay. So I initiate whatever command I want to use the from command with, click. Now the key to this is that, the first thing that you're always going to do with any piece of geometry in model space is define the first point, right? But instead of clicking and defining my first point, I need to use the from command first, because the first point is 3 feet from this object. Okay, so before I do anything, I'm going to shift right click, from this first point, click over, and then the distance, 36, enter. Now one thing that I've noticed about the from command that can happen, and I think it depends on where your cursor's at, if you have dynamic input on. I've got ortho on, but something you'll notice is, do you see that it's pretty darn close, but do you see how it looks like it's slightly above that line there? I've noticed with the newer versions of AutoCAD, because I didn't have this problem with older versions of AutoCAD, that sometimes it can get slightly off that first object. Although it does, let me measure this, even though vertically it may not be at the exact same point as that where you initiated it, it does get it 3 feet away, right? So if I draw a line this direction, I might have to do some finagling to get this line to intersect it all the way, but the main point of from is just to get that gap, right? That specific distance, right? So let's do that again. I could do it using a rectangle, right? Click, shift right click, from this point, click over, and I'm going to turn my ortho on just to make sure it's straight, over 36, enter, and I can even, did I click on rectangle or did I click on line? Let's do that again. Yeah, shift right click, from here, click over 36, enter, there we go, and draw a rectangle. I think the trickiest part of that is remembering that you don't click first, that you have to initiate the from command first. We'll go over it several times. I'll bring it up a lot. Okay, so lines, we know the from command, we know how to measure things now to make sure that they're accurate, we know how to create rectangles, right? Let's talk about circles, and then we'll talk about arcs. I think in the book, Jeff goes through every single arc and circle type there are. I'm not going to go through every single one, because I think once you have 2 or 3 methods to go about it, you can figure out the rest, right? And realistically, there are very few times where I've used more than the first probably 2 or 3 different types of circles, or arcs, honestly, okay? So circle right here, we have arc right here, okay? If I click on the down arrow for circle, you'll see I have 6 different options for circles. We're just going to go through these first probably 4 options, okay? And then with arc, we'll probably just go through these first 4 again, because these are all just different iterations of the first few, okay? So circle, we have center, radius, click. All right, center means I'm going to first define the center, click. Radius means I'm going to define a radius, 12 inches, enter. Okay, radius is half the diameter, so when I measure this, this should be 24 inches in diameter. Okay, before I measure this circle, I'm going to come over here to my object snaps. The object snaps that correspond to a circle are going to be quadrant. Quadrant will allow you to snap to one of the 4 different quadrants on a circle. And then we have center. Okay. So if I measure this, click, measure, you notice that's my quadrant snap right there. Okay, it looks like a little diamond. And then the circle, the mid circle has a center point. There's my center point snap. Okay, so I can click, click, and there's my 2 foot in diameter circle, which was defined by using the radius, obviously. So circle, click, radius, click center, and I could type 24, enter, and I have a 4 foot in diameter circle. I can come up here to measure, click, 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 and there's my 4 foot in diameter circle. Okay, so circles, I like circles. I don't like arcs. And it's really a joke, but they just really never work very well, so I don't like using them. They're fine. Maybe it's your tool of choice, right? Maybe they're wonderful for you, but you'll see me using circles a lot. It's going to be hard for you to use circles in the manner that I use them for a little while because you won't have all the modification commands available to you to kind of manipulate them. But the way that I use circles, I will use circles to draw things like door swings, right? And I'll create an entire circle and then I'll trim off what I don't need, okay? Circles are used for a lot of different things, right? Furniture creation, block creation, tag creation, door swings. I use them all the time for everything, okay? Funny enough. But again, it's going to be a little bit hard for you to use circles because you don't have all the modification commands available to you yet, okay? Circle, so we have our center radius, we have center diameter, click, specify the center, click, and then specify the diameter, 12 inches, enter, and you get a 12-inch diameter circle. I can measure it, click, 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 and I have a 12-inch diameter circle. Okay. Third circle, we have, well, these 2 circles, they kind of function in the same manner. We have a 2-point circle and we have a 3-point circle. Okay, so a 3-point circle will allow you to specify 3 points, and a circle kind of is created between those points. And the 2-point circle does the same thing. You specify 2 points, and a circle is created within those 2 points. All right. Kind of over here, we have some areas where we can, define these, right? So I'm going to come over here and use 2-point circle. I use the drop down, click on 2 points, right? And I specify 2 points. Click, click, and the circle is created, right? Super easy. Circle, 3 point, click, click, click. There's my 3-point circle, okay? And I'm going to leave it at that because those are really going to probably be the, the ones you're going to be using most often, right? The center radius, center diameter, those are going to be used to create well-defined circles, right? You need a 12-inch circle. Great. These 2-point and 3-point are going to be used in places where you have 2 objects defining a boundary. You don't know what they are, but you need a circle between them, right? So you're going to use those to create objects between objects, more likely. We have one other way. Oh, yep.
I want to see how you do a trim.
Well, soon enough.
Okay.
Soon enough. She wants to jump ahead to trim already. Okay. So let's talk about how we kind of do a freeform circle, right? I've done freeform shapes with all of the other shapes that we've talked about. So circle is no different, right? I can draw a rectangle, click, click, draw a rectangle, click, click, draw a line. How do I draw a circle? By just clicking, essentially. Well, I'm going to click my circle. It doesn't really matter which one I'm going to choose, but I'm going to click a midpoint, and I'm going to click my radius, right, or center or diameter, and that will allow me to define that object using another object as a measuring, tool, essentially. So when I created that door swing, right, I clicked on my center radius. You could, if you wanted to choose one, center radius, click, click, and it defined that circle. okay? And I know that, so when I create doors, this is the way that I do it. I trim off the excess, right? But I know that from the center to there is 36 inches, right? So that I know if I use a circle to define that it's going to be created correctly, right? And I know this has been created correctly because that door swing rests very nicely right there at the end of that 36-inch opening, okay? One thing I want to remind you of is lines, arcs, circles, rectangles. When you draw these things, they're just geometry, right? So they can be selected, they can be deleted, right? They can be modified, okay? So I can grab any of these objects that I create with a selection window, right? Click, delete, and they go away, right? I can come down here, I'm panning, I'm holding my middle button down and moving my mouse, right? I can zoom in, I can zoom out, I can grab these, hit delete, and they go away. Oh, we've got some little leftovers, right? Delete, delete, oh, delete, delete. Okay.
How do you measure circles?
You're going to use the measure tool. Let's do that again. So I'm going to click on circle, click. I'll just create a freeform one that I don't know the dimension of, right? And I'm going to use measure, click. And the snaps that we're going to use to measure it are going to be the quadrant. You see the quadrant pop up there? Okay. And the center. So click, click. Or if I wanted to measure the radius, for example, I could click, click, and measure that. And I see the dimension down there. Okay. One thing you're going to see me doing that I always get asked about is you notice that I can reinitiate that command, click, click. I can reinitiate it without coming up to the icon, right? And you know me, I don't like icons. I'd rather use my keyboard. If I execute a command, measure, click, click, and the command is finished, and I want to use that command, that exact command, one more time right after that first command, I can hit enter or the space bar, and it reinitiates it without having to go back to the icon, okay? So you'll see me coming in here a lot, and I'll click on line, and I will click, click, escape, and then you'll see me do it immediately again, even though I escape, right? And I'm out of it, and I hit enter, click, click, escape, go back up here, enter, click, click, right? So it's kind of a way of just getting fast at AutoCAD immediately, but helpful in that you don't have to go and search for an icon again, right? But you can reinitiate any command again for a second, third, fourth, any amount of time by hitting enter right after you execute it, okay? All right, so circles, pretty useful, right? Rectangles, lines, circles. We're going to talk about arcs next. So by the time today is finished, you'll have a pretty good tool palette so far, and you'll be able to modify these things a little bit. We'll talk about some of the modification commands, okay? The arc command is based on a circle. So when you draw an arc, essentially, let me just remind everybody, let me draw some lines here. Okay, essentially this is an arc, right? And the arc is defined by a center, and it has a beginning or an end point here and a beginning or an end point here, okay? When we are working with arcs can be, well, they can be a little tricky in that there's a positive and a negative direction for your arc, okay? And it's the same as a polar input. So anything that goes in the counterclockwise direction is positive, okay? Anything that goes in the clockwise direction is negative. So you want to remember that. But again, we've got a bunch of different options for arcs, and at least for architecture, it's kind of overkill, you know. These first three are really going to be probably the ones that you'll use if you use arc, right? Again, I try and avoid it, but we have our 3-point arc, click, okay? And let me just show you kind of how these work freeform, all right? I'm going to start here. I'm going to look at the command line, and it's going to say specify the first point, and I have 3 inputs. I have a start, an end, and a center. Click, click, click. There's my first arc, okay? I'm going to reinitiate that command, okay? And I want to show you something with these two inputs. One arc went this direction, one arc went this direction, okay? And that's because I started in a different place when I created it, all right? So if I click on arc again, if I start at the top and I move kind of this, do you see I'm moving kind of this direction? End. Okay? It's going to, by default, kind of create it on the left side, right? Now hopefully I remember which way I did it. If I do it from the bottom to the top, oh, I skewed it, sorry guys. It will create the other direction. Now, not to say that I can't flip these back and forth by moving my mouse, right? But there is definitely a way that they're going to generate, right? Whether or not you kind of move in a clockwise or a counterclockwise direction, okay? This is why I don't like arcs. I don't like remembering clockwise or counterclockwise or starting down at the bottom or starting at the top, right? Circle, start at the center, move out, we're done. Okay, so we have an arc, and I'm going to illustrate the arc by creating the door swing over here essentially, okay? So I come over here to arc, I drop down, I'm going to use we saw the 3-point, now let's use the start, center, end. Now the start is going to be the start point, the center is going to be the center of the circle that generates the arc, and the end is going to be the end point. So start, center, end, okay? And down at the end, down at the command line, if I get lost in my command, I can look down here and see where I'm at. Specify my start point, click. Specify my center point. The center point is not going to be up here, it's going to be over here at the center of that circle that generates the arc. And because my arc is going from here down, right, this is the center. Click, end, click, and I have my arc.
So technically, you're just making that right triangle in the direction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good way of thinking about it, as like a right triangle. You're right. Yep, absolutely. Okay, so that's, and I think this is another where it gets tricky, right? Start, center, end. Well, start, center of the arc, end. No, it's center of the circle that generates the arc. Okay, so we have our start, click, center, click, and then kind of by default, end, click. Now, I'm going to sneak ahead a little bit and kind of show you something that I end up always doing with arcs, right? I'm going to select my arc. These little blue squares that you see at the end, midpoint, and actually here, because there's a circle, the center point of geometry, these are called grips, okay? And grips will allow you to do what's called stretch. They'll allow you to stretch geometry and alter it essentially, okay? We'll get to this a little bit later in the semester, but I just want you to know what these things are. So if a grip is blue, that means it's cold, it's not editable, all right? If I click on a grip, click, you see it turns hot, and it's red and it turns hot, okay? That's what it means. Red means editable also, okay? If I click on a blue grip, it turns red and it's editable. It's also kind of stuck at my cursor, okay? And if I move my cursor and I click, that object goes with it. So that's called a stretch. So normally what I end up doing with arcs is I generally get them in the place where I want them, and then I use the grips and I stretch it to however I actually want it to be, right? That's kind of my workflow with it. I'm gonna hit undo, U, enter, enter again, and I'm gonna bring it back to where it was, okay? But if for whatever reason you come in here and you know your arc didn't work the way you wanted, you can grab a grip and drag it to where you want it to go. Okay, let me delete this. We have start, center, angle. Okay, so start, center, angle allows you to specify an arc that goes 90 degrees, 45 degrees. You'll see what essentially what it does. But this essentially gets rid of the end. So instead of clicking for the end point, you're going to specify 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and that's how far the arc will rotate before it stops. So start, center, angle, start, click, center of the circle that creates the arc, click, and then angle. So I can type in something like 45 degrees, enter. and you see it created an arc 45 degrees from the definition of your start, center, and then it created it 45 degrees. Okay. I think this is only useful when you have an off angle, right? Because start, center, end does the exact same thing, right? But you have a click input, which allows you to very easily click here or down here, where this, it's a little bit harder to figure out exactly where 45 degrees is in that, you know, realm. So this is going to be used when you have an off increment, okay? And this is pretty helpful when you have something. Let me show you what this, you're probably like, why is this useful? Why is a, you know, an arc that stops halfway useful? Well, sometimes doors are represented. Have you guys seen a set of plans where doors are kind of represented and they look somewhat like that, right? That's maybe where it's going to be useful. And that's kind of goofy, obviously, but you know, in the generation of kind of plan type stuff, that's going to be helpful. Okay, let me delete that. And arc, we're going to do start, center, length. Okay, this is the last one we're going to do. And again, you know, these, there are just so many, and I really think these are the most commonly used, right? But once you know these as well, you'll be able to get these, you'll be able to figure these out. But start, center, length, again, I'm going to start, click, center, click, and now it's, again, it's going to ask me for an arc length. This is sort of just like start, center, end, right? Again, we're getting repetitive into our third arc. So click, and there's my length. I could have also typed in a length, right? I don't really know what the length from here to there is, though. I guess I could measure it. DIST, enter, click, click. Oh, it is actually 3 feet. Okay, I was thinking it might have been a little longer right there. But so I could have typed in 3 feet, and the arc would have started here, center definition there. The length would have been 3 feet. Okay. Any questions on the arcs? Okay. Okay, so we've talked about lines, we've talked about circles, we've talked about arcs, we've talked about rectangles today. I want to talk a little bit about modification, and I'll talk about it today, and then when we meet next time, I'll reiterate it so that you have a, you know, kind of a second exposure to it. But essentially, you need to be able to modify your geometry once you create it, right? You need to be able to move it. You need to be able to copy it. You need to be able to rotate it, right, into place. Because we don't always draw things in the right spot the first time. So today we'll talk about move, copy. I don't think we'll do scale today, which I had planned on scale, but I think that's a little bit more complicated. So move, copy, and offset. That's what we are going to talk about today. Okay. Now, before I do that, I'm going to delete some of this stuff that I have in here. Let me delete this. I'm going to delete some of these things and just clean it up a little bit, right? I want to recreate this. Okay, I'm going to draw this on the screen so that you can watch me do it. I think it's pretty helpful to watch people draw to see how they do things. But you're going to have to draw this yourself for an assignment. So I want you to, you know, see how it's done first. When I tackle this, I'm going to come up here to line. You can also use rectangle, completely valid, right? Whatever tool you are most comfortable with. What I like about the line tool, right, over the rectangle tool is the line tool is a single entity, all right? So it has a start, a center, and an end, and it's one object. And when you get into some of these modification commands like offset, when you offset things, it offsets entire objects, right? Which you'll see in a minute. But what I like about line is that when I offset a line, it is one object that is offset, okay? As opposed to a rectangle. A rectangle is 4 objects, it's 4 lines that are all connected together as one piece, right? So when I create a line, click, click, there's my line. When I create a rectangle, click, click, and I select it, I see it's all one piece, right? So I'm choosing to do a line because I'm thinking ahead. We're going to talk about offset today, so I just wanted to bring this up. Maybe I might offset this line in the future. So that's the one I want to use instead of offsetting this object, okay? So I'm going to use line to create this object. I come up, click on line, right? I Can line this up using object tracking if I want. Click. Ooh, I need to move in the direction I want to go, but this needs to be straight, so I turn my ortho on. F8. Right? Now I have my straight line. I type 4 foot. I could have also typed 48 inches. Okay? Again, it doesn't really matter how you get there as long as you have the correct results. Enter. Now I'm going to continue on. I'm going to move in the direction I want to go. I'm going to type 4 inches. Enter. Great. Move this direction. Now I can move this direction a little bit, right? I can move past that direction, right? It doesn't really matter as long as I'm moving in the right direction because I'm going to define that distance with an input. 48 inches. Enter. And now I can choose to move in the direction I want to go and type 4 inches, or I could just snap, click, escape, and that is generated. Okay. Now it's time for me to use the from command to create this gap here. I could use the from command, but I could also draw a piece of geometry in that gap and then delete it when I'm finished, right? So let's do both ways. I'm going to initiate the line command. I'm going to zoom in. Don't be afraid to zoom in. Zooming, panning, turning your object snaps on and off, they won't break a command. So you can come in, you can use the drawing aids, zoom, pan, turn your snaps on and off, and your commands won't be broken. Okay, so click, move in the direction I want to go, type 3 foot, enter, escape, escape, and I've got a gap there. Okay, now the way that I would continue on is I would just continue drawing, right? I would come up here to line, click, I could type L at the command line, zoom in a little, click. Now this time I'm going in the downward direction, 4 inches, enter, 4 foot, enter, 4 inches, enter, finish it up, click, escape, right? Completely valid way of doing it. Let me do that using the from command. When I'm done with that, I would select that and hit delete, right? So it goes away, essentially. If I want to use the from command, now with the from command, I have to check and make sure everything lined up when I'm done, because again, I've only noticed the skewing in maybe like the past 2 or 3 versions of AutoCAD. So something is a little different than it used to be, but I'm going to click on the line command. And before I initiate my first point, I'm going to shift right click from this point, click over 36 inches, enter. And that did look like it snapped pretty perfect. All right, so now I've essentially created that gap, not using geometry, just using that object snap. I move in the direction I want to go. I type 4, enter, 4 foot, enter, 4, enter, and close it up, escape. Okay. If I want to check these measurements, I come up here to measure, click, 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 4 feet, enter, right, and it initiates it again. Click, click, 4 inches, looks good, enter, click, click, 3 feet. Okay, so everything's looking good, right? And I'm looking for these kind of things in your assignment, right? I'm making sure that your lines are straight, that your dimensions are correct, right? There aren't a huge amount of requirements at this point, but straight lines and correct dimensions are kind of the main things I'm looking for in your assignments at this point, okay? Time for me to draw this door. So I'm going to click on line. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to snap, right? If I snap and I see my endpoint snap pop up, that means that I'm exactly on that endpoint. I'm touching it, I'm connecting with it, okay? Click, move in the direction I want to go, 3 feet, or I could type 36 inches. I could type 3 foot and also 36 inches because the inches, the default unit in AutoCAD, right? So if I type 36, it converts that into feet, 36 inches, right? And it recognizes it as inches. I could type 3 foot, enter, and I get a 3 foot rectangle. 2, enter. 36, enter, click, close it up, escape. Okay. Now it's time to create that door swing right there, right? Kind of our final piece of the puzzle. I come up here to arc, and I'm going to choose a start, center, end. Start, click, center of the circle that defines the arc, click, end, click, and there's my door swing. Okay. Okay. Any questions about that?
Can you show me the arc again?
Yeah. Let's do the arc one more time. Delete that. And I choose that start, center, end. Okay. So look at the command line, the start point. Click. Specify the center of the arc, and that's the center of the circle that defines the arc. So that's actually going to be this point here, right? Click. The end point. Click. Okay. So if you think about it, right, if I had drawn a circle here, it would actually be, see how that, it would be a portion of the circle, right? Okay. All right, so that's a lot in an hour, right? Lines and arcs and circles and rectangles. So you have some tools to draw now, okay? You can measure whatever you've drawn to make sure that it's correct. You can select and delete things if they're not correct, and you can redraw them, okay? Don't be afraid to use extra geometry to draw geometry, right? So if I have to draw a line across here to create a gap, I have to do that, and I can delete it when I'm done, right? Okay, let's talk about modifying some of our drawing geometry that we've created, right? Once we have created geometry, how do I then move it? How do I rotate it? How do I copy it? How do I offset it, right? Which will help me create and draw things more quickly, right? So instead of, the point of modification is, number one, to get things in the right position, but also to help me create geometry without having to redraw things, right? Once I get a 36-inch line drawn, it would be more efficient, and it would help to minimize mistakes if I copy that or I rotate it, right? Once I know I have something correct. So let's first talk about moving things. Let me just look here. We might have a, I think do we have a copy one here? Maybe. We don't. I thought we did. Okay. Anyway, so let's talk about moving. All right. So our modification commands, number one, our drawing tab here. This is where most of our drawing commands that we've talked about so far are located, okay, under the Home tab. Our modification tool palette is right next to it, just to the right of it right here, okay. If I use the drop down, you'll see we have some other modification commands down here that we don't see here, essentially. What we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about move, copy, and offset. So move, copy, and offset, this little guy right here, okay. Move will allow me to move objects, all right. Move will allow me to move objects just kind of free form, and also a specific distance, okay. So to initiate the move command, I can click on the icon. I can come down and type move, M-O-V-E, enter. I could also shortcut it, M, enter. And I could also come up here to the draw menu, right, and modify menu, sorry, now, and choose move. Okay. So I'm going to type M, enter. Oop. There we go. M, enter. And you notice the move command is initiated. Now, the modification commands are a little bit different from the drawing commands in that you initiate the command. You still have to define, parts of it. You still have to execute it, but in addition to all of that, you have to select objects you want to modify. Okay, so we have a selection that is going to be part of our command now. So the way that we use the selection, you can select an object before you perform modification on it. Okay, you can initiate the modification command and then select objects. It doesn't really matter which direction you go. You'll see me do it both ways. Just depends on how I'm thinking at the moment, right? So I can grab this rectangle, I can click on move, click, and I can move that object. I can also initiate move, select my object, and move it. Okay, so how does that work, right? I can, if I initiate my command first, I click on move, you're going to notice down here at the command line it's going to say select objects. I can select as many objects as I want to move, right? So I can select this one, I could select this one, I could select that one, I could zoom out and I could select that one. Okay, I can use a blue selection window, a green selection window, or a pick, any kind of method that I want. Okay, to clear my selection, if I selected way too many things, I can hit escape and just start over, right? So I'm going to do that because I don't want to move all of those things. I'm going to initiate the move command. I'm going to select this object. When I'm done selecting, I have to let AutoCAD know I'm finished selecting because it thinks, hey, just continue on selecting, right? So I have to say I'm done, which is enter. Okay, so I initiate the command, I select the objects I want to select. When I'm done selecting, I hit enter. And now it says specify a base point. So essentially, you know, I have to define the distance I'm going to move that object in AutoCAD. And I have to do it with a beginning point and kind of an end point system, right? It doesn't really matter where that beginning and end point are because you're specifying like 4 feet between them. And that 4 feet between them says move that object 4 feet, right? But I do have to pick a base point, which is the beginning point, and an end point, okay, to move that. So it says here specify a base point. Okay, click. There's my base point. The base point could be really anywhere again. It's not really the base point that's important for this. It's the distance between the base point and that end point. So I will move my mouse in the direction I want it to go, and I can click and it will move it, right? I can visually click and move it. Or I could type a dimension, 4 foot, enter. And it, between that first click of my base point and that input, I have 4 feet, right? And that object moves that distance. Okay, so let me do that again. So I'm going to hit move, select my object, hit enter, click a base point, click, move, type 4 foot, 4 foot, enter, and that object moved 4 feet. Okay, M for move, select, hit enter, click, move down, type 5 foot, enter. Okay, I can move objects to other objects. M for move, select. When I'm done selecting, I hit enter. My base point is important if I want to move one object to a specific point on another object, right? So if I want the endpoint, top endpoint of this to move to there, then I would select on that endpoint, right? Click. Now I've got my ortho on, so I'm going to turn my ortho off. I'm going to press F8. Oop. You see it turned off, but it didn't break my command. Zoom in, and I can snap. See how it's snapping? There's a midpoint. Click, and I can move those objects to a certain point on another object. Okay, I can undo, I can redo, all of these things. Okay, let's draw something else. I'm going to draw a circle. Click. I'm going to move it. I'm going to select it first. M for move, enter. I'm going to grab a quadrant here. You notice I'm snapping, right? Click. And I'm moving, I'm panning, 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 getting to where I want it to go. Maybe I want it to go to the midpoint of that door up there. So I move it to the midpoint, it snaps, and I click. Okay, so we have kind of free form movement where you want to move one object to another object regardless of dimension, right? And then we have moving a specific distance. So I can click on move, click, select the object. When I'm done selecting, I hit enter, click, move in the direction I want to go, 4 foot, enter. Okay, make sense? Yeah? No? Okay, not bad, right? Again, we'll go over these again next time. So this, you'll have an assignment, and the assignment will really be to sort of just familiarize yourself with what we've been doing today, right? And we'll go back over it again. All right, so we have move, And we have copy. Copy works in the exact same way that move does, but instead of moving objects, it creates duplicates. Okay, so this circle, copy, I have copy right here. Again, I can go to the modify menu, right? I can type CO at the command line, but I'm going to initiate the command, click. I'm going to select the object or objects I want to copy. When I'm done, I hit enter. I'm going to specify a base point, click. Move in the direction I want to go, click again, click. But instead of moving, it duplicates, right? Click, 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 click. You'll notice that that copy is a multiple command, right? So this is called a copy multiple, which it didn't used to be. So if you're in a much earlier version of AutoCAD, it used to only do one copy at a time. So you'd have to copy, do it again, copy, do it, copy. You'd have to initiate the command between. But that's not the case anymore. So click, 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 right? You can get as many as you want here. Okay. I can grab whole objects, whole floor plans, right? I could grab this whole floor plan. I could type CO, enter, click a base point, move in the direction I want to go, click again. Move and pan, click again. Move and pan, click again. Okay. Escape. Let's copy this one more time. CO, enter. You notice I can select it first and then click on copy, or I can select the objects and then hit the command. But I select everything, I hit enter, click, move in the direction I want to go. Maybe I want to move in this direction 10 feet. 10 foot, enter. Didn't quite get that overlap out of there, right? But you guys get the idea. Just like move, but instead of moving, it creates duplicates. Okay, let's get through. We've got one more. I know you guys are probably full, right? But we've got one more command to talk about today, and then I'll just let you kind of, work whatever you want to do. And that is offset. Okay, offset will allow you to create a copy of a piece of geometry at a specific distance from the first object. Right? And the descriptions are way more complicated than it actually ends up being. But for example, I have this line right here, and it's exactly 4 inches away from that line. Well, why did I draw 2 lines when I could have just drawn one and either copied it or offset it? Okay, let me draw a line over here and show you what offset actually does. I'm going to draw a line. Okay, and if I want to offset that line 8 inches, or it will make a copy of this line 8 inches from the original. Okay, so offset is this little icon right here. I'm going to click on the offset command icon, and it's going to ask me to specify an offset distance. Let's say 8 inches, enter. And now it says select the object to offset. Okay, click. And you notice that as I click, I'm not clicking again just yet, but I'm moving my mouse. Okay, if I click again, it makes a copy. And this is again a sequential command where you can just keep going with that same offset. I hover, click, 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 right? So I'm offsetting. Let's do that again. Let me delete these and do it again. I draw my first object, and I'm going to offset it. Let's say I want to offset it 2 inches. Okay, so offsetting will allow me to create a copy of one object a specific distance from the first object. So I come up here to offset, click. It's going to ask me to specify my offset distance. Let's type in 2 inches, enter. Select the object to offset. Okay, this is it. Click, 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 click. And again, this will offset on either side. So if I click here, you notice it can go that way or over here. You see that? Click, click, click. Okay, so I just keep going with it. Now I can offset any type of geometry, right? I drew a bunch of circles over here. I can select those. I'm not just limited to that first object, right? It asks me to select again, so I do. Click, click. Click, 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 right? I can offset in, click, click, until this circle gets too small and it won't physically offset inside. Oh, we're getting probably pretty close. See, it's too small now. The offset won't work, right? But I can click, 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 and I offset it. So when I was first kind of drawing these and I said, I'm going to use a line to draw my walls, and I said, well, maybe in the future I want to offset something, you know, this was what I was thinking, right? Let me get rid of that. If I, for example, wanted to offset this piece 4 inches instead of drawing a second wall, I could. If I had a rectangle, it would offset the entire rectangle when I use that command, right? So thinking ahead, I thought, well, I'll draw a line here. Offset is O at the command line, enter. We'll do 4 inches for my offset, enter, click, click, and I just offset that wall. Okay. If I had had a rectangle there, it would have offset the entire rectangle, which is not what I would have wanted, right? So that's why I decided to use a line when I drew this object here. Offset is used, I use offset for everything, right? I can offset walls inside. So if I draw this outside wall and I want this wall to be 6 inches from that first wall, I offset them, right? If I want this line of that vanity to be, you know, 18 or 2 feet inches off of that wall, I offset it. If I wanted to have maybe a square tub on the inside instead of an oblong one, I would offset it, right? So I use offset for a ton of things. Okay, you know, you'll want to get used to it, try it out. But again, you know, there's no really right or wrong answer as to how these things are drawn, right? I can draw this line, offset it 4 inches, and then draw a little line here and a little line there. That is just as valid as drawing a rectangle, which is just as valid as drawing 4 lines and not using offset, right? I could draw 1 line over here, and I could copy it over to here, and that makes complete sense as well, right? So do whatever, you know, you'll find the tools that you're most comfortable with, and you'll use them all the time, right? But whatever you're most comfortable with, use to create your geometry. Okay. All right. Any questions so far? Not bad. Okay. All right. So you do have an assignment coming up here. You actually will have 3 assignments. Okay. So you're gonna do this arc, circle, ellipse, right? Which is it's this essentially. So you're going to create this door right here as one of your assignments, and then you have 3 other drawing assignments. Let me go over here to the assignments. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. Okay, so here it is, number 2. It's going to be due in about a week, I think. Yep, about a week. So O-snap, circle widget, circle basketball court, and door arc exercise, which is the one we just did on the screen. You're gonna create all of these different drawings. Shoot, and I thought I had those in here. I guess not. Let's look at them really quick though. Let's open your workbook and just look at them so you know what they look like. And I think I might have, nope, shoot. I had my workbook on here on this computer, but it was wiped. So let's look here. It's in the assignments portion of the book. Okay, so mine, your pages are a little bit different than mine, but mine starts on page 2-11, and it's the door arc exercise. Okay. So you're going to draw the door arc exercise, which is kind of what we just did.
I don't have one of those. Is it?
It's just at the bookstore. Yeah, they're like $12 or something. Yeah, you want to go pick one up. So the door arc exercise, right? You're going to draw those walls. You're going to draw the door with the swing, okay? And all the dimensions are on there. So it tells you the wall is 4.5 inches. It shows the gypsum board offset on the wall, right? So you'll use the line tool to create the outline of the wall, and then you'll offset those lines 1/2 inch to get that gypsum board representation, right? Just exactly what we did in class. The O-snap drawings, these little guys, right? For those of you who don't have the book quite yet, these are just a little bit more tricky to do. I'm gonna let you try it out yourself. You gotta figure these out. But if I were to give you a suggestion, you know, make sure that you're using your object snaps, okay? So if on that big square, this kind of one in the top left-hand corner, you can draw a 4-inch by 4-inch square. You can draw that diamond that is kind of rotated in there using the midpoint of those, you know, outlining square lines. You can draw a circle from the midpoint of this line to the midpoint of that line, right? But you can then use the midpoint of this to draw these 4 little lines, which will then define that circle, right? So it's all about this exercise specifically is very much about thinking about the geometry, right? Where's the midpoint? Where are the endpoints? How can I snap to those, right? That kind of thing. The little circle one down at the bottom where you have a 1-inch circle defined, that one's a little bit more tricky. But think about the quadrants, think about the midpoints of the circles and kind of where they fall. Everybody always figures it out. But things I'll be looking for in these assignments, right? I'll just tell you, they need to be dimensionally correct and you have to have them complete, right? So I want to see all of the lines here, all right? The circle widget, this one is done in decimals. Let me just give you another little hint. If there is a 3, like on the O snap drawing, it says 3 inches. Those are drawn in architectural units, feet and inches, okay? I turn the page and wait a minute, 1.00, 2.50, those are decimals, okay? So this drawing is drawn in decimals. Now, I will pick up very quickly on whether or not you've drawn them in decimals or architectural, right? So just, again, it's easy to say pay attention to it, right? But I do it all the, you know, you just get going, you're drawing, you don't think about it, and but just try and pay attention to that. But that circle widget, right? You just use all of those dimensions and you create the circle widget. You turn the page, we have the basketball court, right? This one is back in architectural units. You know, if I were you, I'd write a little note on the page. Make sure I'm in architectural, you know, make sure I'm in decimal. But you will use the from command, you'll use the offset command to create all of these, okay? But they're really just good drawing exercises. You know, if I look at this basketball court, immediately I see a big rectangle on the outer perimeter.
What page is that on?
In mine, it's 2-14, but yours is it the same? Okay, 2-14 at the end of the book.
Oh, 2-1.
Yeah, 2-14. Yep.
I got you.
And I look at that and I think, well, if I draw a rectangle, I can offset that rectangle, right? What is it, 3 feet to get that inner boundary. And then at the midpoint, I can draw that mid-court line, right? So, you know, it's just a matter of kind of looking at it, thinking about it, and kind of drawing it. These little 3-foot lines kind of at the bottom, you know, that are about 19 feet off that midpoint line, use the from command, okay, to get those. So you do, you know, it'll be a little bit probably harder this first time to draw these, but you really do have all of the tools that you need to draw these assignments, okay? So my best advice would be to kind of try it out, and if you have questions in class, we can talk about them, right? When you're working on these first assignments, I think it's helpful to ask questions in class because then everybody can hear the answer, and I guarantee everybody's struggling just like you are with it, right? Okay. So any questions on this? Yep.
How are you supposed to tell if you're in architectural or...
Good question, right? So you can tell, there's a couple ways that you can tell, right? I think the safest way of going about it, you know, would be just to type units at the command line. So you type units, you hit enter, and it tells you, right? You're in architectural units here, right? If you need to change it, you just drop down and choose decimal, okay? One thing. The second thing is usually, and I say usually a lot because every now and again there's a weirdness that happens and it's not usual, but usually when you start a brand new drawing like this and it's blank in AutoCAD, it defaults out to decimal, right? So you open up a brand new drawing. I can tell by having my coordinates on down here. Do you see how those are in decimal right now? 46.0209. I can see that those are in decimal. Bless you. I can type units and figure that out. I could also, let me see here, I believe we've got a units button right here. So if I click on this and I turn units on, okay, I can see that I'm in decimal units right here. So if you turn that on, you visually can see where you're in, what you're in. So I could click on this and I could change it to architectural if I needed to. Okay. And it's tough. I forget all, you know, sometimes I go and I start to work and I think, oh, why isn't it working? And oh, I know because I've done it for so long that, oh yeah, I changed to this unit or whatever. But when you haven't done it very long, it's not always the first thing that you think of. Okay. I want you to turn in all four. You're going to have 4 CAD files when you create these, right? Each of these will be generated in a brand new drawing. So you'll turn in 4 separate DWG files when you turn these in. Okay. Name the exercise exactly as it's laid out here. So, you know, this one's circle basketball court. When you save your CAD file, it will be called circle basketball court, right? And you'll draw this in there and you'll save it and close it and then post it to Canvas. Okay. And I think you have, like I said, about a week, yes, to do this all the way until the 12th. Yep. Okay, there's a quiz that's been posted, so don't forget to do the quiz. That's it for today, unless there's any other questions.
On the basketball court, it says assign different colors to each layer.
Okay, that will come later. I'm glad you asked that. Sorry. Yep, don't worry about anything layers yet for the basketball court. It's a good question. Yep. Okay. Good, good. Yep.
I emailed you about it, but I still got it out.
Oh.
Direct entry coordinate.
Sorry, guys. I haven't checked my email yet, so. If
You emailed me back.
Did I? Oh, you must have emailed earlier in the weekend then?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, okay. So what was the question again? Say it.
I couldn't figure out how I could do all the direct entry until I got to the angle parts, but I could figure it out.
Okay, that's okay. I remember the question now. Okay, so one thing that you can do with direct entry, right? If I'm cruising along and I'm drawing lines like, oh, this one is 4 foot, enter, and this is 8 foot, enter, right? And then I need to create a line that is something like 45 degrees, right? I can come down here to my polar tracking. I can drop down and I can choose the angle I want. And if the angle that I want isn't shown here, right? So for example, I choose 18 degrees. Now I can snap. Do you see how it snaps? And then I could type something like 3 foot, enter, because you have a dimension likely on your, right? Yeah. But if the angle that I want is not specified, I can click on it, choose tracking settings, and I could type something like, I'll hit new and I'll type something like 169 and hit enter and hit OK. And now it'll snap to that 169. I could type in a dimension. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And that'll work whether it's architectural or decimal. Yep.
Can you do that one more time?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I'm cruising along here with my direct input, right? Click, I'm typing in dimensions, and now I need an angle, all right? And I think, maybe my angle's 135. Let's say that, okay? So I can come down here to my polar tracking. If the polar tracking isn't showing up, right, it's this little icon right here, then you'll come over here to these 3 little lines and make sure that polar tracking is turned on, okay? All right, so then I would come down, I would look and see if the angle that I want is listed. Okay, well, 45, 90, 135, there we go. So we've got 0, we've got 45. See how it's telling me off to the right? So I can come down here, snap, and that one is 23.5, but it's, hold on a second. Oh, I'm hitting another one, I think. See, I have 23.5 here. So what you're going to do, let's just do this to make it simple. Let me delete this. Let me delete that one. I'm going to delete that one. If you don't want to guess, you could hit new, and I could even just type in 135, even if it's included in another subset, right? Enter, hit OK, and then...
So you can make your own subsets of, so if you wanted like 90, 45, 22 and a half, and then so on. Okay.
Yep, exactly. And then it snaps when I hit that angle, right? And I could type a dimension like 12 inches, enter.
Okay.
Or 1.41 or whatever, right? One thing I do, again, we talked about this before, but I just don't want you to forget, right? As you're creating these, direct entry is obviously easiest, right? Because you can see it's going this way instead of this way, right? So I prefer that method as well. But one thing, just remember, if you have an angle that is like this, and I'm just going to make this up so it's not right, but you're given, you're given an angle of like, I don't know, 35, right? That angle can be from this direction, but it also could be kind of that other angle that you have to input to get it right. You're going to have to worry about that other angle when you do like a direct or a polar or an absolute or whatever input. When you're doing direct entry, you get the polar tracking to snap, and then you go on, right? So it's a lot easier. But just remember, you have that other angle you have to worry about too. Okay. Any other questions? Good.
Oh, can you show me how to do the trim? Or is that for like
That's later.
Oh, okay.
Yep. She was just wanting to get ahead of us here, right? No trimming for you yet.
Okay.
All right.
What is that called?
Oh, it's the course manual, just the course packet, I guess. It's a course packet for Arch 1310.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Has anybody been to the bookstore lately? Do they have these still in stock, the course packets?
Sure they do.
Yeah.
I use mine online, so
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure they've got it over there. Yeah.
Where is the book?
It's in the student center, the big concrete building in the middle. It's on the first level.
Okay.
Yeah.
First level?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.